Let's start with a number, 200. Between 1692 and 1693, in Colonial, Massachusetts, more than 200 people, men, women, even children, were formally accused of witchcraft. Just imagine that. Dragged from your home, your life completely shattered by one terrifying word.
And for 19 of them, that accusation was a death sentence. 19 people were hanged. Several others died in the horrible conditions of the colonial jails. And you got to remember, these weren't just statistics, they were people. Neighbors, parents, husbands, and wives.
So the big question is, how on earth did this happen? How does a whole community, a supposedly devout, tight-knit village, spiral into a frenzy of paranoia that ends in mass execution? Well, let's get into it.
Because what we're talking about here is really the anatomy of a perfect storm. It wasn't just one thing, but a whole bunch of factors. Fear, superstition, social anxiety that all came together to create one of the most infamous chapters in American history.
So, let's go back. Our story kicks off in the dead of winter, February 1692, in the small, isolated community of Salem Village. This is where the first tiny spark was lit. It all begins with the local minister's daughter and niece. These two young girls suddenly start acting, well, bizarrely. We're talking screaming, throwing things, twisting their bodies into unnatural positions. They complained that invisible forces were pinching and pricking them. A doctor was called in, found nothing physically wrong, and gave his diagnosis: bewitchment.
Under a ton of pressure to name their tormentors, the girls pointed their fingers at three people on the absolute fringes of society. First, Tituba, an enslaved woman in their own household, then Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who was already a bit of a social outcast. They were the easiest targets imaginable, with zero power to defend themselves.
But here's the thing. A spark is only dangerous if it lands in a tinderbox. And let me tell you, Salem Village in 1692 was a community just waiting to explode. The conditions were ripe for it.
So to really get why this happened, you have to look at the whole picture. First, you've got political chaos. The colony's charter from England was gone, so there was no stable, legitimate legal system. On top of that, there were brutal frontier wars going on, which created this constant simmering anxiety. Then there's the religious extremism. These Puritans believed, literally, that the devil was a real, active force trying to destroy them from within. And finally, zoom in on Salem Village itself, and it was just torn apart by nasty feuds between powerful families over land and money. It was a total recipe for disaster.
This kind of environment made certain people especially vulnerable. And when you look at the numbers, it's pretty stark. The huge majority of the accused, we're talking nearly 4 out of every 5 were women. In the Puritan mind, women were seen as spiritually weaker, and because of that, more likely to give in to the devil's temptations. It made them prime suspects from the get-go.
So you've got these accusations flying, fueled by all this tension. But how did they actually lead to the gallows? The answer, and this is where it gets truly terrifying, is a legal process that was so deeply flawed it accepted the unbelievable as stone-cold fact. And the key to the whole thing was this bizarre concept called spectral evidence. The court actually believed that the devil couldn't use a person's shape, their specter or ghost, to hurt someone without that person's permission. So if a girl in the courtroom started screaming that she saw the ghost of, say, Rebecca Nurse attacking her, the judges took that as proof that Rebecca Nurse had made a deal with the devil. I mean, how do you even begin to defend yourself against that? You can't. Oh, and it gets so much weirder. The court allowed other kinds of proof that are just mind-boggling today. They had something called a witch cake. And yes, I'm serious, it was a real thing made with rye meal and the victim's urine. They'd feed it to a dog, believing it would somehow reveal the witch. They did a touch test where if an accused person touched a victim who was having a fit and the fit stopped, they were considered guilty. And they would physically search people's bodies for a witch's teat, any mole or blemish that could be called a mark from the devil. And this whole process was terrifyingly fast. It would go from a single complaint to a public examination where you were basically treated as guilty until proven innocent. And with spectral evidence on the table, getting convicted by the special court was almost a guarantee. From there, it was a straight line to the gallows. There was almost no way out.
For months, the madness just kept escalating. But by the fall of 1692, the tide finally started to turn. The community slowly began to wake up and reckon with what they had done. One of the judges later wrote that they had been walking in the clouds and could not see our way.
So what was it that finally slammed the brakes on all this?
Well, the accusers got a little too ambitious. They started pointing fingers higher and higher up the social ladder, at respected citizens, wealthy merchants, and then, the final straw, even the wife of the governor, William Phipps. Suddenly, the people in power started thinking, whoa, wait a minute. In October 1692, Governor Phipps shut down the special court and, crucially, banned the use of spectral evidence.
And then, the remorse started to set in. 5 years later, one of the main judges, Samuel Sewell, did something incredible. He stood up in front of his entire church while his public apology was read out loud. He took on the blame and shame for his role, which was just a stunning public admission of guilt.
But you know, the official road to justice was incredibly, painfully slow. The first convictions weren't overturned until 1711. They cleared a few more names in 1957, and get this, the very last victim, Elizabeth Johnson Jr., wasn't officially exonerated until 2022. More than 300 years later.
The legacy of Salem is just huge. It's become this permanent, chilling, cautionary tale in American culture about what happens when fear crushes reason, when extremism spins out of control, and when the legal systems meant to protect us completely fall apart.
And that really leaves us with one final thought. We've seen the ingredients from 1692. Social anxiety, political instability, and us versus them mentality, and a complete breakdown of what's true and what isn't. It really makes you stop and wonder, what are the ingredients for mass hysteria in our world today?